Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Cam here with my brief thoughts on The Wild Robot. This was directed by Chris Sanders, one of the co-directors of movies like Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, and it is the latest from DreamWorks Animation Studios. It tells the story of a robot named Rosm. However, she soon calls herself Roz, voiced by Lupita Nyong'o. She is a robot who crash lands on Earth, or well, it is never outright said, but it is heavily implied that it is Earth, not only through the animals that we see, but some of the landmarks that we see a little later. It is an Earth of the Planet of the Apes variety, let's just say. But when Roz arrives on Earth, she is going about her programming and her duties. However, she comes across something she does not expect. A baby gooseling who she later names Bright Bill, voiced by Kit Connor. Roz is a robot, and Bright Bill is a goose. This should not work. However, through a lot of help, mostly due to a fox named Fink, voiced by Pedro Pascal, and it took me a hilariously long time to figure out that that was Pedro Pascal voicing the fox, but I digress. Roz and Bright Bill form a mother-son type of relationship. I was hearing nothing but rave reviews about the Wild Robot, and so I was very excited for it. I was worried that this was going to be one of those cases where I was going to be like, it's good, but it's not that good. I think it's better than I could have ever expected. I think this is going to be my favorite animated movie of the year. This movie was stellar. It goes without saying, but the animation in this movie is absolutely stellar. There are a couple scenes where it takes place on these craggy rocks, and when I saw these rocks for the first time, I thought to myself, this looks like they took heavy inspiration from the Giant's Causeway in Ireland. I know, I have been there. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. But whether it's on these rocks or in this forest, or what we later see on the Earth or even in the world in which Roz comes from. The animation is absolutely top-notch. Lupita Nyong'o predictably crushes it as Roz, and she really strikes a balance here of she needs to be this robot who is on paper supposed to not feel anything, but over the course of time, she adapts to her environment and she begins to think on her own and, most importantly, feel on her own. The movie does a good job of not hammering it home, but showing that this is not supposed to happen. Roz is kind of a ghost in the machine in that she is supposed to be rigid in her task, and she often says that a Rosm always completes its task. However, she didn't count on forming a heart and forming a bond and an attachment to a gooseling of all things. Kit Connor is great as the gooseling Bright Bill. However, the one character that I did not expect to like, but I turned out to really like, was Fink the Fox. When we first see this fox, I was saying to myself, okay, kind of cynical, a little damaged. This is going to be the character where it's just going to reveal that he has a tragic backstory. And it's implied that he has a tragic backstory, but it's never really shown or given. It's more like he's this way for a reason, but we don't need to waste time talking about it. I liked how they streamlined that and they didn't waste any time with the big, my mother was never there for me. Like, there is not a scene like that. And I greatly appreciated that. It's just shown that Fink has been alone for a really long time and he has adapted to being alone and being pretty much hated by everyone and giving that hate back. For the first 15 minutes or so, Fink is not really the most likable character. He tries to eat Bright Bill more than a few times, like a disturbing amount. He makes fun of this one badger for trying to cut down the world's largest tree, or the largest tree on this island at least, makes fun of him, and just generally is not really that likable. But over the course of time and over the course of the movie, you see that as he gets closer to Roz, his heart begins to grow like the Grinch. Really, the crux of this movie and the heart of this movie is the relationships between Roz, Bright Bill, and Fink. And all of them work. All of them have to find their heart, for lack of a better word, in their own way. And the movie, for being only about an hour and 45 minutes, uses its time wisely. It doesn't spend any time falling over itself trying to explain everything. It just presents scenarios in which the characters need to not use this, but use this in order to figure out a situation. And I I got into it. There are a couple of scenes where I was a little leery of and was wondering, are they going a certain direction with this? I thought there was going to be a liar revealed storyline, but no. Once it starts, it's quickly kiboshed in like the next scene. I did like that. And then there was another scene in which Bright Bill finds geese of his own breed, and they immediately do not accept him. And so they try to drown Bright Bill, the geese, they try to drown him. That was pretty dark. And I was just afraid it was going to be like, Bright Bill's going to be bullied, isn't he? I'm not a fan of that. And there's some verbal abuse, but it's not really around much. The movie doesn't linger on it. It shows that Bright Bill's got an uphill battle to try and be accepted by his fellow geese. And it doesn't fall into cliches in that regard. I admired the spirit of that. Necessarily a problem, but more like a thing I pointed out, or thing I pointed out to myself. This movie can be very dark in terms of its humor. And for a rated PG movie, I'm surprised that they were allowed to get away with half of the stuff they were able to get away with. Most of the animals in this movie are trying to eat each other. Fink tries to eat Bright Bill on more than a few occasions, like I mentioned. There are a couple of scenes in which death is brought up in a pretty cruel way, but it is explained away by Fink. I was sitting there thinking to myself, this is meant for families. Like, there's going to be some uncomfortable conversations on the car ride home. One of the things that made me nearly laugh my head off of my body was one of the Badgers says bullshit, but doesn't outright say it. Like when Fink is like, I'm sorry, I'm really interested in your art project now. The Badger straight up says, male bovine excrement. I laughed so hard when I heard that. I'm like, I cannot believe my ears. But that is not really a problem. It's just something that I noticed. DreamWorks has always dabbled in more adult humor, but it's well protected away from like being something like South Park. It's not adult humor, it's just dark humor. It's the kind of humor you don't get when you're a kid, but when you're older, you really notice. That's all that I will say. At the end of the day, though, The Wild Robot, it's getting an amazing grade. It's one of those movies that I was not prepared for, and it just bowled me over in the best way possible. I had no concept of what this movie was. I knew it was based on a book, that's all I knew. And the movie absolutely delivered. See this movie if you haven't. And DreamWorks subtly has been on a bit of a hot streak. Honestly, when it comes to animated stuff, Chris Sanders might be one of the better animated movie directors of all time. Him and Dean DeBlois. I mean, they created How to Train Your Dragon together. That alone qualifies them for greatest of all time status. But I pass it off to all of you. What did you think of The Wild Robot? Let me know in the comments. I would love to read what you have to say. My name is Ryan Cam, and my task is complete.